I'm Bliss, and I want to share a story from my past that still gives me the chills. It's about a stalker named Brendan, who managed to get way too close for comfort through my Instagram account and phone calls. I used to be a social media addict during my teenage and young adult years. No matter what happened to me, I had this compulsive need to post about it on Instagram. I loved the empathy and support I got from my followers, who I like to call random strangers. You see, my mom was a hardworking single parent, doing her best to put food on the table for me. But her long hours of work left me feeling pretty lonely. I turned to the online world to fill that void. One night, around 2 a.m., my mom and I had a heated argument about my social media addiction. I was angry, so I locked myself in my room and posted a highly emotional rant about parents not understanding their children's struggles. I was hoping for some quick dopamine hits from the comments. A few hours later, my phone rang from an unknown number. I was too sad and angry to wonder how this person got my number. Our conversation began, and the stranger introduced himself as Brendan. He asked why I was so sad about my mom and told me that no one had the right to make me cry. His words made me feel warm and fuzzy, and I poured out my feelings, saying how everyone seemed to pretend they cared, but I felt utterly alone. As the night grew darker, our conversations got even more personal. We connected in a way I hadn't experienced before, and it made me feel less isolated. It was like he understood me better than anyone else. Days turned into weeks, and we continued talking. I no longer felt alone, and strangely, my relationship with my mother started to improve too. It was a period of my life when I finally had some peace of mind. It felt like a small ray of sunshine in my otherwise cloudy world. But then, one night, I started asking Brendan some personal questions. I wanted to know more about him, his age, work, and other personal details. He hesitated, and I got mad, abruptly ending the call. He tried calling me multiple times, but I ignored him. Something didn't sit right with me. He hadn't answered my questions, and it started to feel creepy. He kept calling and texting, and this time, I couldn't ignore it. I reached out to my small circle of friends, but they had no idea about Brendan. That's when the creepiness began to grow on me. I had this sinking feeling that he must have gathered basic information about me from my Instagram account. I decided to confront Brendan. I called him, anger in my voice, and asked, "How did you get my number?" But he had no satisfactory answer. I kept grilling him with questions, but he remained evasive. In the end, I couldn't take it anymore, so I blocked him. However, Brendan didn't give up that easily. He started texting me on Instagram, pleading for forgiveness, but I didn't reply. It's almost been a month, and that's when he showed his true colors. His comments on my photos and messages on Instagram became inappropriate and downright creepy. I was terrified and decided to block him again. But Brendan wasn't done. He created another account and continued his harassment. It was relentless, and I felt trapped. My last resort was to delete my Instagram account entirely and walk away from it. To this day, the thought that this guy had vile intentions regarding me still gives me the creeps. It's a chilling reminder of how someone can invade your life through social media, exploiting your vulnerability. It's a lesson I've learned the hard way, and it's why I've become more cautious and vigilant in my online interactions.
I've always been worried someone would post their bad experience with me. So here's my story. I won't lie. I'm the bad guy in this story. There was a time I had a huge crush on someone I worked with at FedEx, and unfortunately, I was the stalker. Still to this day, I feel so much guilt and depression. Being sheltered as a kid does bad things to people. Long story short, I asked this girl if we could be friends on Facebook. She said yes, and I felt a rush of euphoria being as I really had a crush on her. The problem was as I told her sensitive details about my abusive childhood and teenage years, and it was too early to spill my heart out. I wanted to hang out with her to get to know her more because I really liked her. She told me she was a single mom and stuff and felt bad bringing her kid because she said women with a kid scare off most men. But I didn't feel uncomfortable with her bringing her kid to hang out. The day came we got to hang out and she brought her kid. But her kid didn't make me uncomfortable at all. What made me feel very uncomfortable was I noticed the first time we went to hang out at some restaurant called O'Carly's, she had a baseball bat in her car near the middle of the car, between the driver and passenger seat. I felt a wave of guilt and sadness because I felt she was afraid of me, and I felt like I made a bad decision telling her about my past. Things went well after we hung out, and I wanted to hang out more. But there came a time my conscience kept tormenting me with guilt when I kept thinking about her maybe feeling unsafe. Eventually, I messaged her on Facebook telling her about the things in my past being bullcrap and I was sorry for lying. She became really upset and eventually stopped replying to me. I felt even worse and kept messaging her, but eventually it was annoying to her and she ended up blocking me. Eventually, I was stockish and wrote a huge apology letter because I felt extremely awful near suicide at the time. This was the time I had finally gotten my license and started driving. I made another Facebook account and started looking at her pictures and scouring Google Maps like a hawk. Eventually, I found the street she lived on and went to her house at like 2 in the morning during a bad rainstorm. Originally, I left the envelope on her steps, but I noticed the rain gotten progressively worse. So feeling still depressed and on the verge of suicide and guilty, I left the letter in her mailbox because the rain was much worse. And things just escalated. To be honest, I still feel awful. I truly did make her uncomfortable being as she never mentioned where she lived and I freaked her out with the envelope being there. I still feel awful about it, and sometimes I drink until I can't feel my fingertips. Alcohol makes things worse. Now I'm on antidepressants. Best decision I ever made. My advice to people if you have social media: don't allow your personal photos of anywhere near your house be visible to the public. I deleted my Facebook 2 years ago for political reasons. But now you've seen the perspective of the bad guy. I hope I've saved someone else from someone who was in my bad and confusing situation. It all began during my teenage years when I had a burning desire to achieve financial freedom at a young age. I was exposed to those enticing videos promising quick and easy riches, but I soon realized that those claims were nothing but empty promises. If I wanted to succeed, I needed to acquire knowledge and hustle legitimately. Growing up in a neighborhood where some kids turned to selling drugs and pursuing hip-hop dreams, I knew I didn't have the talent for either. So, I took a different path. I immersed myself in finance and investment books, although I must admit I often resorted to illegally downloading PDFs of these books. That's what you'd expect from the son of a small-time drug dealer. As the years passed, I started investing in stocks, primarily by purchasing inexpensive ones. By the age of 23, my efforts began to bear fruit. But I kept this a secret from my parents, well aware that my mother, struggling with addiction, might deplete my earnings, and my father, who had his stash of weed, would be furious if he knew I had taken money from his pockets while he was asleep. As my financial success started to show, I couldn't resist flaunting my newfound wealth with new shoes, clothes, and a fancy watch. My mother, observant as ever, took notice of this transformation and confronted me about it. Panicking, I told her a lie, claiming that I had resorted to selling crack like my father. Later that night, I had a heated argument with my dad, who vehemently opposed my dangerous decision. The argument escalated, leading me to run out of our apartment and stumble upon someone who would change my life forever, a man named Baron. Baron, slightly older than me, possessed a charisma that drew me in. We quickly became friends, and he began coming over to my apartment frequently. Over time, I trusted him completely. However, a few months into our friendship, Baron began inquiring about my sources of income. Knowing how things worked in our neighborhood, I understood that once someone discovered you had money, it was only a matter of time before they tried to take it. I was reluctant to reveal my financial secret, as it was the result of years of studying and understanding finance and investments. One day, while Baron and I were hanging out, he casually asked me, "Why do you admire this Asian-looking Robert guy so much?" I replied, "Because I aspire to be as wealthy as him." Suddenly, I realized that Baron knew about my aspirations, and a chill ran down my spine. I couldn't fathom how he had learned this information. Alarmed, I rushed home, desperately searching every nook and cranny of my apartment. That's when I found a hidden camera discreetly nestled in a crack in the wall. My heart raced, and a flood of thoughts overwhelmed me. I knew I couldn't react too strongly, as it could put my life in danger. In the following days, I tried to maintain a facade of normalcy in front of Baron and at home, all the while being aware that someone was constantly watching my every move. The fear and paranoia were insufferable, but I had to keep my composure for my own safety. Then, one night, a friend knocked on my door with the devastating news that my father had been shot and killed. It was as if my entire world crumbled before my eyes. I struggled to contain my emotions, and after the funeral, I made the difficult decision to move to an unknown location with my mother. We relocated to the countryside and rented a small house, eventually purchasing it as our permanent residence. I started a small grocery store to make ends meet. But what has haunted me to this day is that Baron never showed his face to me after I discovered the hidden camera. He didn't even attend my father's funeral. The thought has lingered in my mind, a gnawing suspicion that perhaps Baron was somehow involved in my father's tragic death. This experience has left me with a profound sense of unease and mistrust.